Give a rule of the piecewise defined function and then give the domain and the range. So here we want to be able to define what is the rule here. So here is our graph, okay, and then we want to determine what the rule is. So let's first take a look at the top graph here, okay. So if we take a look at the top graph, we have an open circle, okay, and that is at the point 2, 1. Okay, and then you can see here that this graph is going towards the right. So it's going towards positive infinity. Okay, so since it's an open circle, that means that the interval notation would be parentheses 2, which is then going towards positive infinity. So the restriction would then state that if x is greater than 2. Okay, so we need to look at any of the options that has greater than. So if you notice here, we have a less than or equal to, we have a greater than for part A, and for part B we have a less than or greater than. So that means that we're going to now just eliminate B because it's not going to be part of that, right? So what do we know? Well, we know first and foremost that x must be greater than 2 down here. Now we got to figure out the function. Well, if you look at the function, it's going through what value on the y-axis? Well, it's going through f of x, which is equal to 1. That represents a constant. So f of x is going to equal 1 if x is greater than 2. So that means you're going to have a 1 here. All right, now let's take a look at the second part. Okay, now the second part here, you can see that we have a closed circle at what order pair? Well, the closed circle is going to be at the point 2, 0. Okay, now if you notice, it's going towards the left, which means that that graph is approaching negative infinity. Okay, so that means you'd have a bracket there. So what would the interval notation look like? Well, you would have parentheses negative infinity, comma 2 with a bracket. So what does that mean? That means that if x is then less than or equal to 2. Okay, now we need to know what value does it cross as far as the y-axis is concerned. Well, it's crossing this point on the y-axis, which is 0. So that means f of x is going to equal 0 if x is less than or equal to 2. And so there is our rule, and let's go ahead and put that answer in. Okay, so we know that f of x is going to equal 0 if it is less than or equal to 2, and then f of x is going to equal positive 1 if x is greater than 2. Let's check our answer, and there is our result. Now we need to determine what is the domain of the function. Okay, now the domain of the function are all the x values that correspond to this particular graph. Okay, so if we want to find the domain of this function, we need to take a look at the x-axis. Okay, and at the x-axis, if you look at the x-axis, okay, it's going to be corresponding to every value on this graph, going from positive and negative infinity to positive infinity, because it's going to still also include the 2, even though it's not included the 2 in the other function. So that means that the domain of this function is going to go from negative infinity to positive infinity. So let's go ahead and put that result in. So the domain is going to be an interval, not separate answers. So we have to choose option B because we're putting in an interval. So we're going to have parentheses negative infinity, comma positive infinity with a parenthesis, and check our result, and there's our answer. So make sure you're careful with which one you choose. Now it's asking us to find out what is the range. So let's take a look at the range of this. Okay, so if we want to find the range of this function, well, it's all the values that represent y. Well, there's only one y that goes here, and there's a 1y here. So there's 1 at 0, and there's 1 at 1. So the range is the following set: 0, and then 1. So let's go ahead and put that in here. So for this question, it says the range is. So we're using commas to separate the answers because we only have two, so we're not going to use B to put it in interval notation. So we have 0, 1 as our result for the range, and there is our answer.